Hey everyone, welcome back. And if you're new, welcome. My name is Adelina and I make videos about living in my tiny house on wheels and living a more intentional life. Today is not a cooking video, but since I want to get these veggies ready to roast, I figured I would do that while we chatted because I think today is going to be a story time video about how I weathered the polar vortex in my tiny house on wheels. So if that interests you, stay tuned. I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I live in a cold climate as it is, but this winter, this February, has been particularly cold for Calgary and for a lot of parts of North America. I have certainly not dealt with the kind of issues that you folks in Texas have, where your pipes have frozen and water's pouring in your house and you're just not prepared for this. My heart goes out to you because if you don't live in that kind of a climate normally, you wouldn't be prepared for this. So this is not about that. This is about a tiny house that was built for this kind of weather and what happened to me. So it's actually warmed up here quite a bit. We are now at, I think, minus 4 degrees Celsius, which is balmy. Anything warmer than like minus 15 feels like, don't even need a coat. But it wasn't like that the week before last. Even last weekend was still pretty darn cold. Sorry about that noise. So I have a trailer that was built by a professional, and it was built for a cold climate. Last weekend's video, so the previous video, not the cooking one, but the one before that, I go over how I insulated the tiny house and the options for insulation. And I mean, I'm very happy with the insulation in the tiny house. I've also talked on this channel about heating options and my furnace in the tiny house, and that has worked really well too. So none of my issues, well, I really didn't have a whole lot of issues, but this story isn't about not having the proper insulation and not having a good heat source, because I do. This story is about how the pipe in my bathroom froze. Now, I've had one instance of a frozen pipe before, and that was last winter during a particularly cold spell when I had my vehicle plugged in, because in this climate in Canada, you have to have a block heater in your car for those particularly cold winter days. And I had my vehicle plugged in, and the heat tape that is wrapped around my pipes is also plugged into that same circuit. So what happened last winter, for some reason, I blew a breaker in the middle of the night, and I didn't realize I had. And my outside plug, that was the breaker that blew. And so by the time I woke up in the morning, the water pipes had frozen to the bathroom sink. When it gets down at night to minus 30, even colder than minus 25, but certainly if it's past that you're going to want to leave at least one tap in your house running overnight, because running water doesn't freeze. I did that with the bathroom sink. I didn't do it with the kitchen sink. I did it with the bathroom sink. And that worked for the first couple of days, and I didn't have any problems ever, actually, so far, knock on wood, this winter with the pipe to the sink freezing. However, one morning I woke up and the toilet wouldn't flush. I mean, it flushed, but it wouldn't refill. The tank wouldn't refill. And what I realized was that the little hose, the flexible hose that goes up in through the floor to the tank of the toilet to fill it, had frozen. So I had to take care of that. And what I did was I went under the gooseneck into the shed, and I put the heater that I have in there to thaw it out And I didn't have to put it on really high. I didn't actually. I mean, even though it's a ceramic heater, and so it's the safest of the options, I was still a little nervous about leaving it on overnight or for long periods of time. So I left it on until the hose unfroze. What I learned from this is that when it's really, really cold, I'm going to have to leave not just the tap in the bathroom running, trickling a little bit, but also the toilet running. So that little trick worked. And because I don't pay for water, even if I was paying for water, it would still be worth doing. But I don't pay for water here at the park. It's part of my rental, you know, the cost of renting the spot. So it doesn't really matter to me that I've let the water trickle all night. But you have to do that in cold climates. So I did see on Facebook, on one of the tiny home Facebook groups that I belong to, somebody that was having an issue with their pipes freezing in their tiny house. And, you know, here's my advice. You can only do so much. I have spray foam insulation, 2 inches spray foam insulation in the floor of my house. I have my pipes all wrapped with heat tape and then with pipe covering insulation. Don't know the word for that. And even still, my pipe froze. And that's because a tiny house is not on a cement foundation. And so the pipes are not coming, even though the water pipe to the house is coming in underground. As soon as it comes out of the ground to get into the house, it's now exposed. Now, you can do some things to make sure that, or ensure that you have as few problems as possible with pipes freezing in your tiny house in the winter. I mean, obviously, wrap your pipes with heat tape. If it's summer, obviously, you turn it off. But you want to make sure that you have something there. And with the weather being so crazy in the world right now, you might think you're in an area where you don't need it, you know, when you're building your tiny house. Put the tape on. Have it there, because the weather could change and you could end up needing it. You could move your tiny house to an area that does get below freezing, and then you do need it, and it'll be a heck of a lot more work to put it in after than to build it in when everything's exposed. So you're going to want to plug in under there. So you want a power source under there to plug in the tape, and you're going to want to put the heat tape on. So that's number one. Number two, you really want to skirt your house in, even if you're only going to be there temporarily, because skirting your house in really makes a big difference in the temperature under there. Yes, it's still going to freeze when it's really cold, but it's going to take a lot longer, and your heat tape will work a lot better if you've got the house skirted in under there. Now, my skirting is just a wood framing and timber framing with the same siding as the house as the skirting. And I do have some vents in the skirting on either side of the house because I want to be sure that there's air circulation under there so that things don't get all wet in the summer when it rains, or even when the snow melts in the winter. So you can, if you're in a permanent spot, or if you want to invest that kind of money, you can put insulated foam panels behind your skirting, and then put the siding or whatever you're going to put on the outside over top of that. I've seen some people who take hay bales or straw bales and they butt them up along the skirting to sort of insulate that, and that works. I would worry, depending on where you're parked, that wouldn't attract some critters to make nests in there. But, you know, it's definitely an option. I've also seen some houses, tiny houses that are in really cold climates, like up in Alaska. And what they do in the winter is they pile their snow up against the house, against the skirting, to add insulation. And I think that's a great option as well. I think you really need to think about what kind of skirting you have and make sure you have heat tape. So that was my drama during the polar vortex, was that. And I learned my lesson that I have to, whenever it gets below minus, you know what, even minus 20 degrees Celsius, I'm going to make sure that my tap's running in the bathroom, just trickling, and that my toilet bowl, like it's running just a little bit, because the trick that I've discovered really works. It runs until it fills up enough, and then it's okay for a minute or two, maybe a bit longer, I can't remember, and then it starts running again. So it's a good strategy. The winter so far has been, oh, I'm just going to show you this. Lemon za'atar dressing from Hellmann's. Really good. And it's a really yummy thing to toss your veggies in when you roast them. So, as I was saying, winter so far in the tiny house this year has been interesting. It's been colder than last year. Now it was my first winter. And I've had to have my furnace on more. And one of the things that I really like to do with my heat at night is I like to take it way down. I don't like to have my heat on very high at night. But I also realized the city of Calgary sent out a little email, or was it on Twitter, where they said that in the winter when it's really cold like we were having, that you should have your heat set no lower than 15 degrees at night, because in order to sort of help prevent your pipes from freezing. And I usually take mine down to like 13 and a half, 14 degrees. So I left it at 15 for that period of time. But what I did for my bedroom, because I can't sleep in a hot room, is I just covered my heat vent in the bedroom, because there's nothing to freeze in there. But I've had my heat on a lot more than usual. And I've also noticed that with the polar vortex and it being so cold, hold on. What I've noticed is that I've had a lot more moisture in the corners of my windows, frost in the corners of my windows. Oh, by the way, I finally bought one of these silicone mats at the recommendation of one of my viewers, so thank you. I haven't used it yet, so I hope that it works. I'll give it a try. I'm just sprinkling on a little of this garlic plus also on there, just to add a little extra seasonings. I'm going to... So during that really cold spell, so even during the day, it was like minus 25 plus a wind chill. So with the wind chill, it would be minus 30, and at night it was below minus 30 plus a wind chill, so in the 40s. Really crazy cold weather, and the wind really is a factor. So yeah, I was having that, and I was kind of concerned about that, thinking, you know, here I've talked about how well my house is insulated, and I have the Lunos HRV to make, you know, sort of manage moisture in the tiny house. So I just did some research, and what I found was that everybody was having the same problem. The fact is that when it's that cold outside, the difference in temperature between the inside of your house and the outside elements is going to cause frost on the corners of your window. Doesn't matter what size of house you have, because everybody I know had that problem. It was everybody, no matter what size house you had, no matter what size furnace you had, what kind of insulation you had. That was a problem that everybody was having, because it was just that cold. And really, it was only a couple of days that it happened, just on the corners of the windows. It would frost. It frosted up, and there was a little bit of ice there. Again, everybody I talked to had the same problem, and the heat exchange just wasn't going to do it, because it was just so cold outside, and you know, I had to have the furnace on inside. And I'm here all day, every day, because I'm working from home, like so many people, and I work from home. Anyways, this is going to be a very bad video, but I just want to show you what it's like under there and how I warm it up if it freezes. So I'm not sure if you can see that all of the pipes are insulated and wrapped with heat tape underneath that insulation. However, the little bit that goes up to the you can't really see it, to the toilet, the little hose that goes up into the toilet, apparently the heat tape doesn't go right up to the top. So when it got to minus 30, colder than minus 30 Celsius during our cold spell, that little bit froze. Ooh, the hair looks looks big today. So what I did was I bought a little heater, and this is how I set it up for when that little bit of hose, that little bit of pipe that went to my, this flexible hose that went to my toilet froze. I just plugged in my heater and set it on this little empty water jug so that it would be pointed in there. I had it on pretty low setting because it doesn't really need to be that hot. I mean, if it's frozen, you're going to want to have you turn it up a little bit. Just get yourself a ceramic heater because they're the safest. Yeah, you're going to want one that's got a tip feature and also a temperature sensor, an overheat sensor, so that you can make sure that you're safe. But it's just plugged in here. And the only other thing that's plugged in here is my trouble light that I was just holding. Having a plug-in under your gooseneck, under your trailer where you can access it, is really important. So that's what I would do. So, what do you do to prevent your pipes from freezing in your tiny house when it gets as cold as it has been lately? I took a 1.5 liter water bottle. And what I did was I cut the bottom off and I just cut a little piece here. Because what I don't like, I really hate the sound of water trickling. It's hard to sleep and I live in a tiny house, so it's not like even with the door closed, you wouldn't be able to hear it. So I wanted just the barest trickle, but I didn't want it to be splashing down. So what I do is I just put this under here and I rest this on the, hold on a sec. And I rest that on the drain. And then when I turn this on, I can have it on the very bare minimum and you can't hear it drip like you would if it was dripping into the sink. It also doesn't build up, mineral buildup from running. Also, you don't want to let it run just with super cold water because that will build up condensation on the pipes that are on the inside of the house under here because the temperature in the house is warm and that water is running cold. So you want it at about sort of room temperature, whatever that is. And then just at the bare minimum. It doesn't need to be running a lot. It just needs to be running a little bit. I don't know if you can see that, but just enough that it's a constant flow. This is really handy for letting your water run and also not having the calcium, the mineral buildup from the water running all night. So that's what I did for my sink. Let me show you what I did for my toilet because I think it was rather ingenious. I'm hoping you can see this. So what I did was I had a little piece of string, I don't know what from, and what I did was I tucked this under the stopper, if you can see that, so that when it closes, it's under there. And what'll happen is, there we go. What'll happen is, once the water gets up and gets full and the float comes up and stops the water flow, it'll stop running. But as soon as enough water trickles through, it turns back on. So that little hose that comes in under here that fills up this tank always has running water going through it. And that solved my problem. When I did that, I didn't have any issues. And it's such a low-tech, kind of MacGyver way to do it, but it works really well. I think what's happened is because the water pipe is wrapped, but probably just, from what I can see, just an inch or two is just above where the tape ends to when it goes in the house is not. And that's enough when it gets to be minus 30, minus 35 degrees at night. And the water in the toilet's not being flushed for that little bit to freeze. So for me, that worked. Hopefully that's an idea that you can take with you and use if you ever encounter that problem. I think that is sort of the weak link when it comes to the pipes and the sort of insulation and heat tape of them is that just that little bit. So when I move the tiny house and all the skirting is off, I'm going to get that fixed. But in the meantime, I just do this. So that's my story time. That's what's been going on at the tiny house since we've had that polar vortex. They are calling for more cold weather this winter, so we're not done it yet. But now at least I'm prepared for it. I'm ready for the next time that the meteorologists predict that kind of cold weather. I will be prepared because I should have known better. And you know, to be fair, I did, in that I had my tap running, but I just didn't think about that, the little hose that comes up through to fill the tank from the toilet. But let me show you the heater that I used. So if you've watched my video on heating your tiny house, you already know my thoughts on having a secondary source of heat in your tiny house, because the last thing you want is for your furnace to go out and have no other options. Now, I bought this at Home Depot and it cost me, I think, about $45. Having this, I know that if I have that problem again, I can just go under there, plug this in and heat that up and thaw those pipes out. And that's why having a plug-in under your gooseneck or under your trailer close to where your pipes are, where the water comes in, is really important, because you're going to want to be able to plug something like this in. Just don't put a propane heater or anything under there. You want something safe. And I'm not an expert, so do your research. But I do know that I would not put a propane heater under there. You want, or anything with an open flame, you want something that's super safe. And this little ceramic heater is the way to go. I know this because my father-in-law, who knows, I'm going to just say it, he knows everything. Seriously, that man, just, you go to him for anything and he is the wise one. And he told me to do this when I called him last year after I had that pipe freeze, and it worked like a charm. So that's my story. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but I did read that person's question on that tiny house Facebook group, and the advice that was given to them was to do exactly what I did, so I didn't even bother chiming in because they were already getting the same advice I was going to give. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you guys watching every week, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Still notice that the majority of my viewers are not subscribers, and when you subscribe, it lets YouTube know that the content is valuable, that it's worth recommending, and that means that we can get information out to more people that have these kinds of questions or are curious about living in a tiny house, and we can have more people join our family, which is awesome because you guys are amazing. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next week. You know what else is really handy to have when it's that cold in the winter? A big tiny house cat.